The confrontation did not begin with outrage. It began with a policy. Spain's government introduced a sweeping digital accountability package aimed at strengthening platform moderation obligations, misinformation controls, and algorithmic transparency requirements for large social media networks operating within Spanish jurisdiction. The proposal aligned partially with European Union frameworks, but extended enforcement mechanisms beyond baseline EU mandates. At first glance, it appeared to be another regulatory tightening in an era of increasing digital governance. But this proposal carried a sharper edge. It introduced national-level penalties for platform non-compliance that could escalate to temporary service restrictions within Spain if systemic violations were identified. That clause changed everything. Elon Musk's platform had already navigated regulatory friction in multiple jurisdictions. But Spain's initiative introduced a hybrid enforcement mechanism, EU-aligned, yet nationally amplified. It signaled that member states might begin layering additional constraints on top of Brussels' digital frameworks. Musk responded carefully at first. He framed the proposal as a threat to open discourse and innovation. He argued that fragmented national enforcement inside a unified European market risked creating regulatory chaos. His message resonated with digital entrepreneurs who feared compliance complexity across multiple states. Spain's leadership defended the move as necessary to combat coordinated misinformation networks and protect democratic institutions. They emphasized that digital platforms cannot operate above sovereign law. The debate quickly transcended Spain. Across Europe, policymakers watched closely. If Spain succeeded in imposing enhanced national restrictions without legal pushback from Brussels, other member states might follow. The European Commission found itself in a delicate position. It had built the Digital Services Act to harmonize enforcement across the bloc. Spain's move risked reopening fragmentation. Within days, Musk escalated rhetorically, not with personal insults, but with structural critique. He suggested that certain governments increasingly conflate regulatory authority with narrative control. He warned that layered national enforcement inside the EU could undermine digital innovation and push platforms to reconsider operational allocation within specific jurisdictions. Markets reacted mildly, but attentively. Spain's tech sector dipped slightly amid uncertainty. European tech investors began modeling scenarios where compliance burdens multiply unevenly across member states. The real turning point came when Spain's regulatory authority initiated a preliminary compliance review of Musk's platform under the proposed framework, even before final parliamentary approval. The symbolic message was unmistakable. Madrid was signaling seriousness. Musk countered with a technical maneuver. He accelerated decentralization features within the platform's content moderation architecture. Community-driven reporting mechanisms were expanded. Regional moderation panels were introduced, designed to demonstrate localized governance rather than centralized control. This move complicated Spain's narrative. If moderation authority is partially decentralized and participatory, defining systemic failure becomes more complex. Spanish officials argued that decentralization does not eliminate platform responsibility. Musk's team argued that distributed governance enhances resilience and reduces top-down bias. The standoff intensified. European Parliament members debated whether Spain's initiative undermined EU harmonization principles. Some supported Madrid's assertiveness, arguing that national democracies retain ultimate responsibility for safeguarding civic stability. Others warned that fragmentation could weaken Europe's collective digital market. International observers paid close attention. Washington analyzed whether national-level enforcement trends in Europe might affect American tech firms more broadly. Beijing observed whether Western democracies were moving toward greater state oversight, similar to its own model, albeit through different legal philosophy. Weeks passed without resolution. Spain's proposal advanced through committee stages domestically. Public opinion polarized. Civil society groups split between free expression advocates and anti-misinformation campaigners. Musk intensified his public messaging, not with personal attacks, but with strategic framing. He argued that the line between combating misinformation and controlling political narrative can become dangerously thin if oversight definitions lack clarity. He positioned himself as defender of open digital architecture rather than opponent of democratic institutions. The European Commission attempted mediation. It reminded Spain that digital enforcement harmonization remains core EU principle. Quiet negotiations sought compromise language, aligning national provisions with broader EU frameworks. But Spain faced domestic political pressure. Recent disinformation controversies had shaken public confidence. The government framed strong regulation as defense of democratic integrity. The confrontation evolved into a philosophical contest. Is platform governance primarily a matter of supranational harmonization? Or do national governments retain discretion to escalate protections within their territory? Musk's strategy emphasized economic leverage subtly. Spain's digital ecosystem relies heavily on global platforms for advertising and startup exposure. Extended confrontation could dampen investor confidence. Yet overt threat of service reduction would risk public backlash. Instead, Musk pursued infrastructure resilience. Data routing was diversified. Operational nodes were strengthened outside Spain to minimize localized enforcement vulnerability. Not withdrawal, resilience. Spain responded by clarifying that enforcement mechanisms target systemic compliance, not access restrictions. The government sought to avoid appearance of censorship. As negotiations deepened, independent legal scholars intervened publicly. They noted that while Spain possessed authority under national law, layered enforcement must align proportionally with EU legal supremacy principles. Excessive divergence could invite European court challenges. This analysis shifted momentum. Spain signaled willingness to refine penalty thresholds. Musk indicated openness to structured transparency cooperation, provided definitions remain precise. Months later, the conflict resolved not through capitulation, but calibration. Spain adopted revised digital accountability provisions aligned more explicitly with EU frameworks. Musk's platform accepted enhanced regional reporting commitments while preserving decentralized moderation architecture. The predicted explosion never occurred. Instead, Europe witnessed a high-intensity negotiation over digital sovereignty boundaries. The episode became a case study in the maturation of digital governance inside democratic systems. No tyrants, no traitors. But a powerful reminder that in the digital age, regulation and architecture exist in constant negotiation. Power did not shift through insult. It shifted through structure. The conflict did not explode in a single moment. It built pressure like a fault line under a quiet city. Spain's government announced an emergency parliamentary debate on digital sovereignty, following what officials described as a coordinated wave of destabilizing online narratives during a sensitive political cycle. The government proposed accelerated enforcement powers, allowing national authorities to demand immediate algorithmic risk disclosures from major platforms operating inside Spanish territory. The proposal moved fast. Too fast. Unlike broader European Union frameworks, which rely on layered consultation and harmonized compliance procedures, Spain's draft included provisional authority that could compel rapid content risk audits within 72 hours of regulatory notice. That clause sent shockwaves through the digital policy world. Elon Musk's platform had already navigated scrutiny across multiple jurisdictions, but Spain's approach felt different. It did not simply demand transparency, it demanded urgency. Urgency changes leverage. Within hours of the announcement, Musk publicly warned that regulatory overreach disguised as emergency authority can destabilize the very democratic processes it claims to protect. He framed the move not as digital safety enhancement, but as executive acceleration beyond procedural norms. Spain's leadership rejected that framing. They argued that modern information warfare requires speed. Disinformation networks operate in hours, not weeks. Bureaucratic delay, they said, is a vulnerability. The debate shifted instantly from technical compliance to political philosophy. Speed versus deliberation. Sovereignty versus digital autonomy. Security versus expression. Financial markets began quietly adjusting expectations. Spanish tech equities dipped slightly amid regulatory uncertainty. Venture capital discussions pivoted toward jurisdictional risk exposure. Investors began asking a difficult question. If Spain can impose accelerated emergency oversight, will other member states follow? Brussels watched closely. The European Commission had invested years building a harmonized digital governance structure across the bloc. If Spain's national acceleration created enforcement asymmetry, it could fracture the unified regulatory market Brussels fought to preserve. Inside Commission headquarters, policy teams modeled legal implications. Could Spain's emergency digital powers conflict with EU supremacy doctrine? Would failure to intervene signal weakening of centralized regulatory coherence? Musk escalated strategically. Rather than threaten withdrawal, he initiated structural redesign within the platform's moderation ecosystem specific to European jurisdictions. Regional oversight dashboards were introduced. Local content review councils were expanded. Algorithmic exposure mapping tools were refined to demonstrate compliance capacity without conceding centralized regulator access to proprietary systems. This move complicated Spain's narrative. If platforms demonstrate proactive transparency mechanisms voluntarily, the justification for emergency compulsion weakens. Spain countered by advancing the legislative timetable. Public hearings accelerated. Government officials emphasized that voluntary measures lack enforceable guarantees. The confrontation became a chess match. Musk leveraged architecture. Spain leveraged law. Media across Europe amplified the tension. Headlines framed it as a defining battle over who governs digital speech in democratic societies. Yet beneath the rhetoric lay highly technical negotiations about compliance thresholds and enforcement triggers. The inflection point arrived when Spain's draft included a clause allowing provisional suspension of algorithmic amplification features during active regulatory review. That clause was seismic. It did not ban the platform, it targeted amplification. Amplification defines reach. Reach defines influence. Musk responded with a calculated message about the dangers of government-directed throttling mechanisms. He argued that allowing state authorities to pause amplification algorithms risks politicizing visibility decisions. Spain's officials replied that amplification algorithms already shape public discourse invisibly. Oversight ensures accountability. The debate intensified. European Parliament members began questioning whether Spain's draft undermined EU-level harmonization. France expressed cautious support for stronger oversight, but warned against fragmentation. Germany signaled preference for coordinated EU-wide interpretation rather than national acceleration. Behind closed doors, European Council leaders sought compromise. Neither side wanted a precedent that could destabilize continental digital infrastructure. Meanwhile, global actors observed carefully. Washington viewed the clash through the lens of transatlantic tech diplomacy. If Europe splintered internally, American firms could face unpredictable compliance environments. Beijing analyzed whether democratic states were drifting towards centralized digital control models resembling its own structure, albeit with different rhetoric. Public opinion in Spain polarized sharply. Civil liberties advocates warned against algorithmic throttling authority. Others argued that unchecked amplification fuels instability. Musk's platform analytics showed heightened user engagement during the controversy. Conflict attracts attention. Attention drives narrative dominance. Spain adjusted tactically. The provisional suspension clause was softened to require judicial review before activation. This modification reduced executive discretion while preserving enforcement credibility. The tension eased slightly. Negotiations deepened into definitional refinement. What constitutes systemic digital risk? What metrics justify emergency oversight? How should proportionality be calculated? Weeks turned into months. The final legislative package that emerged looked different from the original draft. Emergency authority remained, but thresholds were higher. Algorithmic intervention required multi-layer authorization. Transparency obligations became more granular, but also more clearly codified. Musk accepted enhanced regional reporting protocols tied to judicial review safeguards. Spain preserved sovereign regulatory authority within clarified EU-consistent boundaries. The explosive headlines faded. But the structural shift remained. Spain had tested the limits of national digital sovereignty within the EU framework. Musk had tested the elasticity of platform autonomy under territorial law. Neither side collapsed. Neither side fully dominated. The confrontation produced something subtler: calibration. Digital governance matured through friction. The broader lesson echoed beyond Spain. In the modern world, digital platforms function as transnational infrastructure. Governments function as territorial authorities. Their collision is inevitable. But when conflict evolves into structural refinement rather than rupture, systems strengthen. The episode redefined the boundaries of speed, oversight, and sovereignty in Europe's digital ecosystem. Not through insult, not through destruction, but through architectural negotiation. And in the 21st century, architecture is power.